In the 1960s, families would pull up to a garbage dump inside Yellowstone National Park, set up lawn chairs, and watch grizzly bears eat trash like it was a drive-in movie. Park rangers didn't stop them. They sold postcards of it. Today, that same behavior would be unthinkable. Modern bear country looks nothing like it did just a few decades ago, and the bears themselves have changed too. This is the story of how human choices quietly rewired bear behavior across America's national parks, and why the rules you follow on the trail exist because of mistakes we already made. To understand where we are now, you need to rewind to the early 1900s. When America's national parks were first established, wildlife management wasn't really a thing. Parks existed to attract visitors, and nothing attracted visitors quite like bears. Yellowstone, Glacier, Yosemite, and the Great Smokies all had one thing in common. They let bears become entertainment. Hotels inside the parks would dump leftover food in open pits, and grizzlies and black bears would show up every evening like clockwork. Tourists packed the viewing areas. It was a spectacle, and the National Park Service not only tolerated it, they promoted it. In Yellowstone, the bear feeding grounds at places like Otter Creek and Trout Creek became some of the most popular attractions in the entire park. And it wasn't just the dumps. Along park roads, black bears learned that approaching cars meant getting handouts. Tourists would hold out sandwiches, crackers, even candy bars. Photos from this era show bears literally leaning into car windows. Rangers called them panhandler bears, and there were hundreds of them. At the peak, Yellowstone alone had dozens of bears that spent more time begging along roadsides than foraging in the wild. Now here's the problem. When a bear eats human food, something shifts in its brain. Bears are incredibly smart. They have excellent long-term memory, and they learn fast. A single successful raid on a cooler or a garbage can creates an association that can last a lifetime. The bear learns that humans equal food, and suddenly every campsite, every picnic table, every parked car is a potential meal. Biologists call this food conditioning, and it is one of the most dangerous things that can happen to a wild bear. A food-conditioned bear does not just lose its fear of people. It actively seeks them out. It becomes bolder, more aggressive, and more unpredictable. And the worst part? Once a bear is deeply food-conditioned, it is extremely difficult to reverse. The bear has essentially been trained, by us, to be dangerous. Through the mid-20th century, bear-related injuries in national parks were shockingly common. Yellowstone was averaging over 40 bear-caused injuries per year during the 1960s, and property damage from bears was a constant headache. But even with all these incidents, the park system was slow to change. The bears brought tourists, and the tourists brought money. It took a pair of tragedies to finally force the issue. In August of 1967, 2 young women were killed by grizzly bears on the same night in Glacier National Park, in 2 completely separate incidents miles apart. The events, later chronicled in the book Night of the Grizzlies, shocked the nation and forced a reckoning within the National Park Service. The investigations revealed what biologists had been warning about for years. The bears involved had been heavily food conditioned. One of the attack sites was near an illegal dump where bears had been feeding regularly. The message was finally unavoidable. The way parks had been managing bears, or really, failing to manage them, was putting people in danger. What followed was a dramatic overhaul. Starting in the late 1960s and accelerating through the 1970s, the National Park Service began closing open garbage dumps, installing bear-proof dumpsters, and strictly enforcing rules against feeding wildlife. In Yellowstone, the famous bear feeding grounds were shut down one by one. It was controversial at the time. Some park visitors were furious, and even some biologists worried that cutting off the food supply too quickly would cause desperate bears to flood into campgrounds. And in the short term, that is exactly what happened. The first few years after dump closures saw a spike in bear conflicts. Hungry bears that had relied on garbage for years suddenly had to find new food sources, and many of them turned to campgrounds and developed areas. Some had to be relocated. Others, sadly, had to be destroyed. It was a painful transition, but park managers held firm. They understood that the short-term chaos was the cost of decades of bad policy. And here's where the story gets really interesting. Over the following decades, bear behavior actually started to shift. Slowly but measurably, new generations of bears that had never been fed by humans began to behave differently. They were more wary of people, more likely to flee at the sight or sound of a human, and more focused on natural food sources. The bears were, in a sense, going wild again. This wasn't just anecdotal either. Researchers tracking bear movements and behavior documented real, quantifiable changes. Bear-caused injuries in Yellowstone dropped dramatically, from over 40 per year in the 1960s to an average of about 1 per year by the 2000s. Think about that. 40 injuries a year down to roughly 1, largely because of policy changes that started with closing garbage dumps. If you are finding this fascinating, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to National Park Secrets. We make videos like this every week, exploring the stories you won't find on the trailhead signs. Now, let's talk about what bear management looks like today. Modern bear management is a layered system, and it is far more sophisticated than most visitors realize. First, there's food storage. In most bear country parks today, you are required to store all food, coolers, and anything with a scent in bear-proof containers or lockers. In the backcountry, bear canisters, those hard-sided cylindrical containers, are mandatory in many areas. Some parks also require hanging food from bear poles or cables. The goal is simple: make sure bears never get rewarded for approaching humans. Then, there's aversive conditioning. When a bear starts showing signs of habituation, meaning it is tolerating human presence at close range, rangers step in. They use rubber bullets, beanbag rounds, loud noises, and trained dogs to teach the bear that being near humans is an unpleasant experience. The idea is to rebuild the bear's natural wariness before it escalates to food conditioning. It does not work every time, but it has saved a lot of bears from being relocated or euthanized. Bear spray has also become a game changer. Studies have shown that bear spray is more effective than firearms at stopping bear charges, and it is now standard recommended equipment for anyone hiking or camping in grizzly country. Parks like Yellowstone and Glacier even have bear spray rental programs. The widespread adoption of bear spray has reduced injuries on both sides of the equation. Fewer people get hurt, and fewer bears have to be killed in defense of life situations. But perhaps the most interesting modern development is how our understanding of bear psychology has deepened. We now know that bears are not just reacting to stimuli. They are making complex decisions based on memory, experience, and learned associations. A mother bear teaches her cubs where to find food and, critically, what to avoid. This means that good bear management has a generational payoff. When you successfully keep one generation of bears wild, the next generation inherits those wild behaviors. This is why the progress we have seen is so encouraging and so fragile. Every time a visitor leaves food out, feeds a bear from their car, or fails to use a bear box, they risk undoing decades of careful work. A single food reward can kickstart the conditioning process all over again. This is not hypothetical. In parks like Yosemite, which has a large population of clever black bears, managers deal with food-conditioned bears every single year. The battle is ongoing, and it is not just about the parks themselves. As human development pushes further into bear habitat across the American West and Southeast, the boundaries between bear country and human country are blurring. More people are living in areas with active bear populations, which means the lessons learned in national parks are now being applied to suburban neighborhoods, rural communities, and even small cities. Bear-proof trash cans, wildlife corridors, and community education programs are becoming the new normal in many parts of the country. There is also a philosophical shift happening. For most of the 20th century, bear management was primarily about protecting people from bears. Today, it is increasingly about protecting bears from people. The recognition that human behavior is the root cause of most bear conflicts has fundamentally changed the conversation. When a bear breaks into a car in Yosemite, the question is no longer just what do we do about this bear? It is also what did the visitor do wrong, and how do we prevent it next time? This shift matters because bears play a critical role in their ecosystems. Grizzlies and black bears disperse seeds, regulate prey populations, and even help cycle nutrients through the soil. Keeping bear populations healthy and wild is not just good for the bears. It is good for the forests, rivers, and landscapes that millions of people visit every year. So the next time you are in bear country and you see those metal food lockers, those trail signs reminding you to carry bear spray, or those rangers patrolling campsites after dark, remember, none of that existed 60 years ago. Every one of those measures is a direct response to real events, real injuries, and real bears that were lost. because we did not understand the consequences of blurring the line between wild animals and tourist attractions. The bears of today are wilder than they have been in nearly a century. That is not an accident. It is the result of hard lessons, difficult policy changes, and the ongoing commitment of scientists, rangers, and visitors who take the rules seriously. The story of Bear Country is ultimately a story about us, about what happens when we treat wild animals as entertainment, and what is possible when we choose to do better. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of Bear Country, make sure to like this video and subscribe to National Park Secrets. We have got a lot more stories like this coming your way. And if you have ever had your own bear encounter in a national park, drop it in the comments. We would love to hear about it. Until next time, stay wild, stay safe, and keep those bear canisters closed.